After studying this module, one would be able to learn about the key concepts of the transpersonal paradigm, understand the counseling process of the transpersonal approach, examine the intervention strategies used by the transpersonal practitioners, and evaluate the contributions being made by transpersonal counselors and therapists. The term transpersonal means beyond the personal, ego or self. Transpersonalism is a developing and controversial field that includes a group of approaches made possible only in the late 20th century as ancient Eastern religious traditions became exposed to and eventually blended with modern psychotherapies in a historically unprecedented way. Transpersonal theory stands at the interface of mental health practice and spirituality and is one of the few approaches to integrate psychological concepts, theories and methods with the subject matter and practices of the spiritual disciplines. Transpersonal approaches have been called the first of modern sciences to take a rethink of both spirituality and the practice of counseling. Generally known in the literature as transpersonal psychology, transpersonal theory as it applies to mental health practice is concerned not only with the diagnosis and treatment of psychological problems associated with normal human development, but also with difficulties associated with developmental stages beyond that of the adult ego. The practice of transpersonal theory can include discussions and interventions pertaining to spiritual experiences, mystical states of consciousness, mindfulness and meditative practices, shamanic states, rituals, the overlap of spiritual experiences with disturbed mental states such as psychosis, depression and other psychopathologies, and the transpersonal dimensions of interpersonal relationships, service, and encounter with the natural world.
Key concepts of transpersonal counseling. Approaches to transpersonal psychology. One of the earliest formal definitions of the new discipline was published in the first issue of the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology. Transpersonal psychology is the title given to an emerging force in the psychology fields by a group of psychologists and professional men and women from other fields who are interested in those ultimate human capacities and potentialities that have no systematic place in positivistic or behavioristic theory, classical psychoanalytic theory, or humanistic psychology. Many other transpersonal psychologists have sought to integrate insights and concepts from Asian sources. Asian psychologists generally focus more on spiritual levels of experience and much less on the pathological. They include maps of states of consciousness, discussions of developmental levels, and stages that extend beyond traditional psychological formulations. Walsh summarizes the literature on Eastern meditation and related practices as psychotherapeutic. Another approach emphasizes transpersonal psychology's inclusion of experiences ignored in other fields of psychology. Transpersonal experiences may be defined as experiences in which the sense of identity or self extends beyond the individual or personal to encompass wider aspects of humankind, life, psyche, and cosmos. Transpersonal psychology is the psychological study of transpersonal experiences and their correlates, which include daily lives, creativity, or spirituality inspired by such experiences. The Perennial Model. The Perennial Model includes the following four basic premises. First, a transcendent reality or unity binds together all phenomena. Second, the ego or individual self is but a reflection of a greater transpersonal self or oneness. We come from and are grounded in that self. However, we've become estranged from our origins, and we need to return to them in order to become fully healthy and whole human beings. Third, the fact that individuals can directly experience this reality or greater self is at the core of the spiritual dimensions of life. And last, this experience involves a qualitative shift in experiencing oneself and the larger world. It is a powerful, self-validating experience. Another transpersonal theorist, Ralph Metzner, has collected descriptions of transpersonal growth or the transformation of human consciousness. These portrayals include such key metaphors as the transforming of a caterpillar into a butterfly, awakening from a dream to reality, moving from capacity to liberation, going from darkness to light, being purified by inner fire, going from fragmentation to wholeness, journey to a place of vision and power, returning to the source, and dying and being reborn. A new paradigm. It was Thomas Kuhn who called it a new paradigm. Tart has given a detailed analysis of the ways in which the paradigm of transpersonal psychology differs from that of traditional psychology. These include the following. Old. Physics is the ultimate science. The study of the real world, dreams, emotions, and human experience in general are all derivatives. New. Psychological reality is just as real as physical reality, and modern theoretical physics indicates that the two are not so far apart. Old, the individual exists relative isolation from the surrounding environment. We are each essentially independent creatures, and so we can seek to control the world as if we are not a part of it. New, all forms of life share a deep level of psychological and spiritual connections. Each individual is a cosmic creature, deeply embedded in the cosmos. Old, our ordinary state of consciousness is the best, most rational, most adaptive way the mind can be organized. All other states are inferior or pathological. Even creative states are suspect, often seen as bordering on the pathological. New, higher orders of feeling, awareness, and even rationality are possible. What we call walking consciousness is really more like walking sleep, in which we use but a small fraction of our awareness or capacities. Old. Seeking altered state of consciousness is a sign of pathology or immaturity. New. Seeking to experience different states of consciousness is a natural aspect of healthy human growth. Old. The basic development of personality is complete by adulthood, except for neurotics, people with traumatic childhoods, and the like. New. Ordinary adults exhibit only a sedimentary level of maturity. The basic healthy adult personality is merely a foundation for spiritual work and the development of a far deeper level of wisdom and maturity. The work of Ken Wilber. According to Wilber, growth is the heading of a series of dichotomies within the individual. First is the split between conscious and unconscious, or persona and shadow. Next is the division between mind and body. Following this is the separation of organism and environment. The final stage is the attainment of unity with the universe. Each level of consciousness, Wilber argues, has its own issues, problems, and appropriate forms of therapy or spiritual practice. Wilber has also written about human growth and development in terms of two fundamental processes. First is the outward arc, the process of personal ego development. The second process is the inward arc, the process of transpersonal spiritual development from self-consciousness to superconsciousness. In the outward arc, one begins with what Wilber calls the membership self. As one acquires language and becomes socialized in a particular culture, next comes the stage of the mental egoic self, in which one assumes a positive self concept and a healthy, balanced ego. The final stage of the outward arc is the integrated self, the stage of self-actualization, generally the highest level of human development identified in Western psychology. The inner arc begins with the low, subtle self, which includes highly developed intuitions and various kinds of extrasensory perceptions. The next stage, the high subtle self, has been described by the world's greatest mystic as the experience of bliss and visions of divine realms. The final stages are the low causal self and the high causal self, portrayed in mystical literature as the highest level of illumination and spiritual attainment. The work of Stanislav Grof. Another important transpersonal theorist is Stanislav Grof, an European psychiatrist who has written extensively on psychedelic research and altered state of consciousness. Grof argues that although we are separate individuals, our minds contain universal patterns and truths in addition to our personal experience. Grof has described the major characteristics of psychedelic experience. They include transcendence of space and time, transcendence of distinction between matter, energy, and consciousness, and transcendence of the separation between the individual and the external world. Grof has broken down psychedelic experience into four categories: abstract, psychodynamic, prenatal, and transpersonal. Abstract experiences, which are primarily sensory, include the extraordinarily vivid perception of colors and sounds. Psychodynamic experience, in which emotionally charged memories are relived, also include symbolic experiences similar to dream images. Prenatal experiences deal with birth and death. Grof discusses four stages of birth process. The first begins from the time before labor, the developing child resting comfortably in the womb. This stage is associated with a sense of limitlessness and with symbols such as ocean. The second stage, the onset of labor, is associated with anxiety and threat, a sense of being trapped. During the third stage, the fetus moves through the birth canal. This stage is symbolized by struggle for survival, crushing pressure, and a sense of suffocation. The fourth stage is birth itself, the struggle that finally ends in relief and relaxation. It may include vision of light and beauty, a sense of liberation or salvation, or the experience of death and rebirth. Transpersonal experiences include the sense of consciousness expanding beyond ego boundaries and beyond space and time. Among another experiences are extrasensory perception, visions of archetypal images, ancestral memories, memories of prior incarnations, or the sense of merging completely with others. The work of Michael Washburn. Washburn identifies three major stages in human development: pre-egoic, from infancy to early childhood. The ego is weak and undeveloped and dominated by the dynamic ground. Egoic, in late childhood through middle adulthood. The ego makes psychological growth possible by dissociating from the dynamic ground through repression. Trans-egoic. In later adulthood, a developed and mature ego becomes integrated with the dynamic ground. Psychosynthesis. The fact that we have spoken of the ordinary self and the profounder self must not be taken to mean that there are two separate and independent I's. two beings in us. The self, in reality, is one. What we call the ordinary self is that small part of the deeper self that, waking consciousness is able to assimilate in a given moment. It is a reflection of what can become even more clear and vivid, and it can perhaps someday succeed in uniting itself with its sources. Another important transpersonal pioneer is Roberto Assagioli. Assagioli, an Italian psychiatrist who studied with both Freud and Jung, developed the system called psychosynthesis. Assagioli distinguishes two levels of work in psychosynthesis: personal and transpersonal. Personal psychosynthesis focuses on the integration of the personality around personal self. Transpersonal psychosynthesis involves alignment of the personality with the transpersonal self. Assagioli points out that the self at the personality level is basically a reflection of the transpersonal self. Major constructs. Cartwright has outlined the following core principles that all transpersonal theories seems to share. Transpersonal psychotherapy and counseling views the nature of humans as spiritual beings. Psychological work is conducted in the context of the person as a spiritual being. Consciousness is central to transpersonal work. This is important for the client to experience insight that lead to change, but even more important for the counselor, whose own inner exploration and consciousness work provide the guiding light for the therapeutic journey. All transpersonal psychotherapies are experiential. Without direct experience, concepts, especially transpersonal concepts, remain barren. Transpersonal counseling focuses on emotions and feelings: loving, kindness, compassion, opening the heart. Whatever term is used, feelings are valuable in transpersonal therapy and essential for transformation and change to occur. The following assumptions characterize transpersonal counseling. The universe has a purpose. People are more than their physical being. People are part of and interdependent with the rest of the world. All beings are interrelated. People have a function or purpose. People are here to understand and fulfill their place in the universe, not to make the universe fit them. People have the potential for higher levels of awareness, but generally have not realized this potential. To grow, people must question and modify. Both rational and experiential knowledge are important. Intuition is a powerful cognitive faculty and can be developed. Spiritual growth is an essential need for everyone. The counseling process. Counseling goals. Transpersonal counseling promotes people's spiritual development. The goal is to achieve a state of consciousness which can be and is being experienced and lived at certain moments of heightened awareness when a person is lifted out of the limitations of ordinary existence. In such a state, one experiences a sense of enlargement, limitlessness expansion, and a sense of being pervaded by an intense joy and bliss. It is indeed a sublime experience which words cannot express. Goals include increased feelings of self-worth, self-acceptance, spirituality and hope, appreciation of life and caring for others, a decrease in materialism, greater inner directedness and a sense of meaning and freedom. People are helped to lose their self-centeredness and develop global awareness, a knowledge of one's place in the universe. In order to develop the ability to live in harmony with oneself and nature, people can resolve past pain, anger, and disappointment and replace them with peace and harmony. They can achieve spiritual awareness and enlightenment, a transcendence of the self, and an appreciation of the unity of all things. Relationship between counselors and client. The practitioner should provide the core conditions of empathy, genuineness, respect, and caring, as well as a safe therapeutic environment. Collaboration between client and counselor is integral. Both are expected to learn and develop from this process. Practitioners are viewed as more advanced students of enlightenment, educating, facilitating, and offering help and guiding clients, but never directing, forcing, or imposing. Counselors facilitate transpersonal experiences and enhance their benefits. They are carriers and agent, not source of enlightenment. Counselors often share their own transpersonal experience. However, whether or not to self-disclosure is up to each practitioner. The process of change through transpersonal therapy can be disconcerting and even painful because it involves movement into new and unfamiliar areas. Consequently, the role of the practitioner and the therapeutic alliance are very important. The process of change. Transpersonal theorists emphasize the value of integrating transpersonal concepts and approaches into more traditional counseling approaches. Despite their apparent differences, for example, many conventional treatment systems encourage making the unconscious conscious, controlling one's thoughts, strengthening the ego, and working towards clear goals. Transpersonal theorists, on the other hand, believe that once realized, goals need to be transcended, that people first need to develop strong egos and then detach from them, thereby losing self-centeredness and connecting to the universe. Transpersonal theory suggests shift in orientation to facilitate movement towards higher levels of experience and functioning. In an apparent paradox, the transpersonal theory holds that only by letting go of power and control and abandoning one's driven and goal-directed ways can one achieve more responsibility for one's life, one's move towards higher levels of consciousness and fulfillment. After reasonable success in achieving power, one needs to be open to experience. After achieving the capacity for clear and logical thinking, one needs to be open to intuition and spontaneity. After developing one's capacity to modify and direct one's feelings, one needs to feel and experience them. Transpersonal experiences. Learning and change come from present experience. Of greatest importance are experiences of altered states of consciousness that involves a sense of transcending one's usual boundaries. According to Holden, transpersonal experience is a spontaneous, transcendent experience involving perception or action that transcends the ego boundaries of space or time, and which is paradoxically perceived as authentic or potentially authentic by the experiencer ego with consensus reality intact. Transpersonal experience give people access to their higher selves and their deepest resources of creativity, as well as to reality that goes beyond human knowledge. Insight, intuition, and subtle awareness are important aspects of these experiences and often lead to a paradigm shift or a new way of viewing the world. Mystical experiences, for example, are typically characterized by such emotions as joy, love, and peace, a sense of unity and spirituality, and positive changes in attitude and self-image. Such peak experiences, however, are not an end in themselves. Rather, altered states are of little use unless they lead to altered traits. Back points out that spirituality or the transpersonal has both a public and personal side. It is the transformative nature of these experiences that leads to insight, growth, and lasting change. Blocks to development. Holden identified four impediments to people's personal and transpersonal development that keep the higher self repressed or undeveloped and prevent people from having transcendent experiences. She refers to these as the 4 I's: innate factors, cognitive immaturity, inexperience limiting knowledge of options, impotence. The 4 I's are reflected in a person's style of adaptation. They need to be assessed and addressed in counseling to alleviate blocks to growth. In addition, Holden recommends assessing people's physical, interpersonal, intrapersonal, and transpersonal realms. By transpersonal, she refers to people's sense of connectedness to a higher power, either within themselves or outside themselves. Intervention strategies. Wilber called for an integrative therapy that takes a holistic approach, investigating and addressing each of the developmental stages and using interventions that range from changing nutrition and exercise to cognitive restructuring to specific spiritual disciplines depending on the client's developmental stage and pathologies. The transpersonal counseling must be ready to draw from all traditions, both Eastern and Western. According to Wilber, the transpersonal counselor must be an expert in most forms of interventions, regardless of the theoretical modality. This extent of expertise is necessary because guiding clients through the maze of developmental possibilities is certain to require a wide range of interventions, based on clients' personality, lifestyle, and personal experiences. The core practice of transpersonal counseling or psychotherapy includes meditation, mindfulness, intuition, yoga, biofeedback, breath training, contemplation, inward focusing, visualization, dream work, guided imagery, and altered state of consciousness. Other practices that are associated with transpersonal psychology but are not as commonly used include shamanism, lucid dreaming, and psychedelic drugs. Arguably, of all the interventions available to the transpersonal practitioner, the most central is meditation. Comparing the role of meditation in transpersonal psychology to the role of dreams in psychoanalysis, Walsh and Vaughan refer to meditation as the royal road to transpersonal. The scope of meditation and related practices have a range of uses, including self-regulation, relaxation, and pain control. But their most common use is for self-exploration and self-liberation. Meditation allows clients to disidentify from their masks or egos and realize their fundamental non-duality, which leads to the liberation and transcendence of the self. Another key aspect of transpersonal counseling or psychotherapy, of which meditation is a part, is the exploration of human experience known as altered states of consciousness. Metzner defined an altered state of consciousness as a change in thinking, feeling, and perception in relation to one's ordinary baseline consciousness that has beginning, duration, and ending. Deep structure analysis allows the individual to cluster altered states of consciousness and experiences and identify a number of deep structures which Wilber has classified into a number of hierarchical states. Subtle states. Once consciousness and mental activity has calmed, a person may experience a range of altered consciousness states that fit into the category of subtle states. Experiences in these states can include experiences of light or sound such as love and joy, and visions of archetypes such as shamanistic power animals, Christian angelic figures, etc. Causal states. After subtle states have deepened and stabilized, then causal states devoid of any objects, images, or phenomena can arise. Causal states are the realm of pure consciousness and the transcendental source of all existential experience. These states can be culturally described as the experience of nirvana in Buddhism and the Tao of Taoism, etc. Ultimate condition. In this final state, objects and emotions from the subtle states reappear, but they are instantly recognized as expressions, projections, or modifications of consciousness. This is the final enlightenment and realization of consciousness in all things. It is connectedness with the entire universe and all things in it. The ultimate condition is the highest goal and greatest good in all human existence. This experience can be culturally known as salvation, Zen's one mind, and Hinduism's Brahman, Atman, etc. Holden described four broad approaches to transpersonal treatment which can help people address and stay in touch with spiritual material without being overwhelmed by it, so that they can experience and integrate its benefits. Grounding is used if people's functioning is diminished because they are overwhelmed by their spiritual experiences. It narrows people's focus of attention to outer reality only. Grounding can be accomplished through physical exercise, problem solving, concentration on daily tasks and activity, and focusing. Centering helps people benefit from spiritual experiences. It brings attention to inner reality while maintaining outer awareness. Centering techniques include deep breathing, relaxation, quieting exercises, biofeedback, yoga, meditation, massage, and focusing. Opening reduces concentration on both outer and inner reality to help people attend to spontaneous and emerging inner experiences, to facilitate a passive surrender of deliberate thought. Techniques include trance induction, focusing, meditation, imagery, hypnosis, Reiki, and other energy methods and biofeedback. Processing integrates both inner and outer spiritual experiences into the ego using focusing as well as therapeutic dialogue. Many other techniques also can be productively incorporated into transpersonal counseling. These include writing down dreams and transpersonal experiences, creating a spiritual autobiography, forms of bodywork, and a day of silence.
A summary of this module is as follows. Essentially, three dimensions apply to any approach to counseling and psychotherapy: content, process, and context. Content refers to the subject matter dealt with, process refers to the techniques and strategies used, and context refers to the practitioner's view towards counseling, suffering, healing, and mental health. Davis examined how these dimensions pertained to transpersonal counseling. Content of transpersonal counseling includes transpersonal and mystical experiences, peak experiences, and spiritual emergencies. Process of transpersonal counseling includes practices drawn from spiritual traditions such as meditation, initiations and vision questing, ritual, and shamanic inductions. Context includes holding in view the client's intrinsic health, being mindful and present-centered regardless of the particular content or processes, approaching counseling as both an act of service and an act of work on oneself, and recognizing non-duality in the counseling situation. Transpersonal counselors are most concerned with fostering a deepening and integration of a person's sense of connectedness, whether it be with self, community, nature, or the entire cosmos. Regardless of the life difficulty or psychological problem at hand, transpersonal counseling will almost always seek to send the client inwards. The more one can introspect and reflect on oneself, then the more detached from that self one can become, the more one can rise above that self's limited perspective, and so the less narcissistic or less egocentric one becomes, or the more decentered one becomes. Transpersonal practitioners generally accept that most people are unwilling, unable, or simply not ready to work at a transpersonal and transcendent level. Thus, one of the primary goals of transpersonal counseling is to bring the client to a point where she or he can begin to work on transpersonal issues. It is simply not enough in the transpersonal counselor's mind to bring a client to an acceptable or healthy level of mental health. If given the chance, the transpersonal counselor will always seek to go beyond this mark into the realm of transcendence, unity, and extraordinary mental health.